So the Eliminator round 3 saw Claire and Navi go up against each other. This one was in the Fisher Random or Chess 360 or Freestyle Chess, whatever you want to call it, format. So this will be interesting because I've never played a version of this in my life, but it would be useful to kind of give my thoughts really, well, first of all, the initial setup and then how they kind of navigated their way through it. So I think, so what do I see from the initial position? So probably a couple of bits come to mind, and because it's symmetry, the same plans for white will apply here for black. So this queen in the corner is interesting that it's really limited on scope. So one way is that you kind of launch a h-pawn up the board to try and get your queen some activity there, but I think most likely you'd push your g-pawn and activate the queen on this long diagonal. And then the other one of these two knights that are sitting in the corner, so knights on the rim are dim, and knight on a1 or a8 are particularly dim. So I'd look to be bringing my knights out here. And like I say, given that I want to be playing g3 or g4 to get the queen out, I think bringing this knight to c6 is a bit of a blocker, makes a bit of sense, and then probably the other knight to b6. So I think that'll be my kind of opening plans and ideas, getting the knights out here, moving the pawn to get the queen on the long diagonal. I think the other bit is space is usually kind of key, and moving pawns that have got rooks behind them make a lot of sense. So I think launching your c pawns and your g pawns make a bit of sense. So I think my opening move would probably be g4, maybe looking at a c4, and then putting the knights behind it and activating my queen. I think that's my first 4 or 5 moves that I'd see playing from here. But what did we get in the game? Claire opened with g4, exactly what I think I'd have played first, for the same principle. Pushes the pawn behind your rook and activates your queen. So I think from my perspective that makes sense. Engine like g3 as the best move. Navi with c6, it's kind of okay. I mean, it blunts the look of the queen, which makes a bit of sense, and it's pushing a pawn that the rook is sat behind, but it's one of the squares that you were going to probably put your knight on. So I suppose if you're doing this, you're then going to bring your knight here. Maybe you're going to be playing for d5 and bringing your knight over to d7. I think that will be the plan that Navi's going for. So Claire goes with d4. Like I said, I think I'd have followed up with c4 for it, but I mean it's kind of principled in main chess that you take control of the centre with your your e and d pawns, so makes a bit of sense here, but does open it up. Given that the queen wants to come on this diagonal, this pawn isn't protected yet, you're opening yourself up. So yeah, engine gives best move, which I think makes sense with g5. Symmetry position, pushing the pawn behind your rook, opening up the queen to attack the centralised d pawn. So I don't think this was the best choice. I think c4 would have been better here, but gives a reasonable advantage for white. Yeah, the engine evaluation kind of hovers somewhere between 0 and 1. It kind of favours white because white gets to make the first move, and because obviously there's no theory here for what player they're going to be playing. It's going to oscillate quite a bit. So c6, kind of nervy start really from Navi here. He's only pushing his pawns 1 square, whereas Claire's gone 2 squares. And like I say, taking space in this format I think is going to be useful. You don't want to get your pieces stuck on the baseline, particularly when you're not familiar with the position. So I think having extra space is going to be nice, and I think the engine will probably reward that as well with its evaluation of the position. a3, don't get that at all really. All it does is controls the b4 square, which your bishop is already looking at, so I don't really see what this is doing, unless it's to play bishop b4 or to play b4. I don't really see what this is achieving, and given this is move 3, I think there's other better candidate moves. I think like c4 would have been better, developing this out here, or doing something to try and get your remaining pieces out. So I think a3 is a bit too slow and doesn't achieve anything, so wasn't a big fan of this. d5, so they've kind of got like this London style setup. If in doubt, play the London, and that applies to this random position freestyle chess. So it's kind of a solid pawn structure, which obviously has its own advantages. Disadvantages now is where you're going to put your pieces. So this light square bishop is going to have a harder time getting out. You're going to have to maybe push your f pawn, which undermines your structure a bit. And if you can't get this bishop out, then your rook and your queen might be struggling to get out as well. Claire breaks now with e4, trying to unload the centre. Engine doesn't like it. It now says that black's got a slightly favourable position. I think it makes some sense. Like if they trade, you get a centralised queen, which is nice, and if they don't, you've got options of maybe trying to lock it down by playing e5. I don't think you want to trade and open up the c-file where the rook is. I don't think that's advantageous. So I think if you're playing that, you're playing it to either leave the tension or to play on with e5. So g6. So like I say, at some point you wanted to unleash this queen. Unleash this queen, attacking the currently undefended d4 pawn, and also gives your bishop another escape out. It does, however, you put all your pawns on light squares, apart from this a pawn, which is a kind of solid structure, but it means that this light square bishop is absolutely horrendous. I think if you're going to do this, rather than playing c6, I think c5 would make more sense, or looking now to play c5, such that your light square bishop can get out outside of the chain, trade itself if needs be, because the kind of structure you want is, if you've got all your pawns on light squares, you want to have a dark squared bishop with it. So this guy's going to be really key in the position. Your light squared bishop doesn't have much play currently in it, so if it can trade itself, even if it's for a knight, I think that's something that black should be looking at. Yep, e5, kind of happy. I think that makes sense from my perspective, although the engine doesn't like it. It now says that black's got an advantage, but trading isn't very good. Locking down the position and getting space, I think, makes sense. I suppose the reason why it's not going to be so good is because you can start to undermine the structure. So a move that I just said that black wanted to play anyway is going to be c5. So now c5 comes with a bit more venom. If they can dislodge this d4 pawn, then your e pawn's going to be really loose, and then your queen can start coming and attacking it. So I think black's plan, the engine is saying, is to play for c5. I think white would probably be forced to reinforce it with a pawn, because you'll need to maintain this two pawn wedge in the middle, and then you'll probably see the inverse, that black's got all their pawns on light squares and white is going to have a lot of their pawns on dark squares, so we'll have a weird bishop complex, and also the king's kind of loose as well. So in the eventuality of c5, c3, then this light square bishop can start coming out and doing some work, so attacking the king with a check here, and maybe you're blocking with your knight coming here, or you're playing like a really ugly looking b3. But instead brings the bishop out the other way to h6, which is a bit of a one move threat. Like, yes, you're attacking the rook, but it's not particularly useful. I'd say you should be playing for c5 here, and if there's ever a trade, your bishop would be coming out to take that potentially. Bringing it out the other way doesn't achieve a lot. Like I say, you're attacking the rook, but actually you're inviting white to play g5 and really lock down this position, and that's the move that white would really want to play anyway, and the fact you're giving it them with tempo is a bit like gift wrapping it here. So if white can play g5 and lock it down, black's going to really struggle to get their rook and their queen out. They're going to have to try and break open this position to get either piece out, whereas white, because they've got the space advantage, white's queen's not in the same kind of lockdown position. It can swing out at will. So the move is definitely g5 here. There is I think even bishop d2 will be favourable for white, again because of the complex pawn structure that black's got, where they've put all their pawns on the light squares, are saying their strong bishop in this position is the dark squared bishop. So if you can trade that off and leave them with this light squared bishop, you'll be doing quite well there as well. So there's probably still an argument that you could play the dark squared bishop out, and then after a trade and lock it away, that would be, I think, really good for white as well. So I'm not opposed to a bishop d2 and trading the bishops off, but playing g5 gives you the tempo and the certainty that you'll do it, whereas if you put the bishop there and they get traded, black then has a tempo to try and crack out from this position. So trade is what we get. I'm amazed that this gives an advantage to black in this position. I'd kind of take white here. Like I say, having this bishop almost in jail is no good thing. But I suppose, yeah, they have the breakaway with c5. So maybe white should have been playing for b4 to really clamp down on this c5 pawn break. So maybe if we go back to this position, rather than playing the bishop here, I think white's plan should be lock the bishop away to send it back, and then play b4. I think that then makes a lot of sense. You've really restricted all of black's pawn pushes then. They can't go here because you've got control of this twice, and they can't push here because you'll have control of this twice. So let's see if that's the engine's play. I'm thinking that g5, kick the bishop, followed by b4 would be, I think, the best move. So it says push it all the way back and then b4. Yeah, okay, nice. It's nice having some validation from the engine with your kind of thought process. So yeah, this is what I go for. You've got control the dark squares with your pawns to combat white's light squares, but because you've got the space advantage, you're with white got the control here. This piece, how is this going to get out? You've got to really push your h pawn to try and get it out, but even then it's going to be a struggle. So if you're playing h6, you can lock it away with one of these two moves and kind of keep the structure closed until the time where you want to break it open as white. And black doesn't have any pawn pushes and kind of no play in this position. But like I say, what we saw in the game was the bishop trade, which ordinarily would be okay, but you need a couple of extra moves as white. You want to be able to play this to lock black's position away. If you can get these in with the dark square bishops off, that's an even better route, but black now has a couple of tempo to crack out. So knight b6, developing move. Engine gives this. I think I'd look at one of these two moves again as the way of doing it. I suppose b4 allows the knight to jump. No, it didn't allow the knight to jump in because you can trade it. But b3, not a big fan of that move. I can kind of see that this pawn is weak, right? So if the knight wants to jump here, attack this weak pawn, and so your ways of defending it are kind of limited. So I'm surprised, yeah, so knight b3 means that you can't defend that at all. So what's the engine's view here? If you play knight b3 and knight goes here, are you sliding your rook over? No, you're not even sliding your rook over, you're just giving up a pawn with check? Interesting. I don't kind of get the logic behind that. I guess what Claire played makes sense to stop the knight from coming there, but I'd play b4, like I say, to kind of clamp down on this c5 square. But b3 it is. Now this knight is horrendous. We talked about black's light square bishop being a poor piece. White's knight sitting on a1 is not doing a lot at the moment either. Knight out. Now again, the engine wants you to lock down the position with g5, and you're basically just playing against a really passive queen in the corner and a light square bishop that's doing nothing. But I suppose for these players it's going to be challenging to try and come up with a plan on the fly when you don't play random chess. So they just kind of play a bit of shuffling moves of trying to get to a semi-normal position, get your pieces out, I suppose, is also rule number one for this. So a4 doesn't do a lot, bit of a waste of time compared to some of the other plans that are available in the position. h5, I kind of like this idea from black, saying I've got a queen that's stuck in the corner, I need to crack it out, let's move my h-pawn. If you get a trade, that's really favourable for black. Firstly, you hit with check, but the pawn structure gets dismantled from white. You're leaving them with an isolated h-pawn and a kind of unconnected f-pawn, whereas you've kept a single pawn chain in operation and you've brought your queen out. And even if they don't take, if you're taking and trading back, that's still favourable for you. So I presume h5 should be met at some point with g5, locking the position down. So if you can get in a g5, lock it down with h4, you've still achieved that same structure where there's no getting out for the black pieces. The engine says insert a5, which is a bit of a in-between intermezzo, because you're basically forcing the knight back. So I presume it would be a5, kick the knight back, and then play g5. I'd imagine is what the engine says. So push it, kick it back, yeah, and then g5 to lock the structure. But what we got in the game was h4, which is the right kind of idea, but you need to make sure that black can't trade pawns. You need your pawn on g5 to lock it down before you play h4, because now the best move for black is just to take it, and after trading, black's got the better exchange of the pawns in that case. But they don't. They play the right pawn breaks, but at the wrong time. So I think, like we've talked about c5 a lot, they finally play c5 just at the wrong time. they should be trying to break out here to make sure the queen's got somewhere. And after trading, I think c5 makes more sense, but you don't want to give white the option of kicking your knight and playing g5. White goes for this, developing move of the knight, but this is not strong, because now, like I say, upon c5, I think you've basically got to reinforce it with the pawn, because you don't want to have to trade with the knight, because then this pawn falls. You've got a knight and a queen staring at it, so it's going to be impossible to defend against it. So black should just take here, pick up a pawn, and probably with quite a bit of venom in the position. You could maybe even take here first, so you're unblocking on this side, and then pick up the pawn in the middle, but this is now definitely swinging in black's favour. Yeah, but they miss it. They play c4, missing the golden chance really to blow up the position and take a favourable initiative. B takes c. Again, you want to be inserting a5, because the knight doesn't have any squares to kick it back before you then take it, to force them to take with a pawn if they're going to recapture. And in that line, it'd probably be okay for white, because you kick the knight back, they've traded back with the pawn. You can maybe wedge it there with c3, and it'll be kind of a bit of a long-term weakness. You could then try and slide your knight out to apply some double pressure to it. But taking first is not good, because then the knight can swing in. You've got this a pawn on the side of the board that's no good, and now the knight's coming to quite an advanced c4 square when you have the opportunity to kick it back to a8. Bishop takes, not a big fan of it. It allows the rook to come in with some tempo, attack this pawn, which is difficult to defend, and now you're starting to put some pressure on these pawns as well. There might be some sacrifice ideas maybe with knights coming here in the future. Black can want to be taking here as well. Pushing the pawn makes some sense. And then they go on a knight manoeuvring to try and get it here to attack the pawn. Makes some sense. The knight's not doing a lot on this square. Moving it to reroute it makes some sense, and also allows you to open up your bishop by bringing your bishop down here. So white's best move is knight up to b3, which makes some sense, like defends this pawn, develops it off the terrible square. So I'd imagine the continuation here is you play your knight there. This terrible bishop has finally got a chance to get involved in the game, and I think its best chance of doing so is probably coming here to put pressure on the knight before then playing knight up to c6, because this pawn is loose. White's trying to defend it with the knight. You can eliminate that with your bishop to try and pick up the a pawn. But instead, c3 is played, which I don't dislike. You've kind of got a nice solid pawn structure, but you're opening up this checking line for the bishop potentially to develop itself. And as the engine will probably say for a couple of moves, white should be playing g5, and every time that white is not playing g5, black should be taking this pawn, because black's better off with the pawn structure after the trading. White is better off with the pawn structure after they play g5. So I think the engine will probably suggest best moves in both cases of play g5 if you're white and take if you're black, like it is here. So it gets the bishop check in, and the best move is just to slide your king out of the way. A blunder is to block with your knight, because it then stops your rook from defending the pawn, and you've put yourself in the way of a pin. So black can just gobble up the free pawn here. So the first kind of material blunder of the game, down a pawn now. And white goes for a kind of a counter strike, a bit of a cheap shot really if black misses it, trying to attack the f7 pawn, which would fork the king and the queen. However, it kind of plays into what black wants to do anyway. So because of this pin, the king's got to move before the knight can, and the knight's got two defenders, the rook and the king, two attackers, the bishop and the rook. So black should be trying to think, can I get a rook over to the c file and attack this knight 3 times, which is going to be very difficult for white to defend against. So to do that, black's got to move their king, and by playing your knight up here, you're basically saying, please move your king anyway, because otherwise I'm going to take here and fork you. So Navi kind of forced into a move that he probably wants to make anyway by playing king e7. I don't know why. What's the benefit of king d7 over king e7? I couldn't tell you. So this says -2 position for black. I'd have played king e7, which is what he played, which swings it up to +0.7. And I can't tell you what the difference... No, I don't know. So king there, yeah, you need to get out of this pin and move your knight in the next couple of moves. They bring their knight back, which has got like a very passive way of doing it. So black's plan should be to double up the rooks then, so you're attacking it 3 times. The way to defend it would be to have to drop your knight back to e1 to defend it for a 3rd time, but then black would then start bringing their queen through the board. So I'd imagine some route around. Maybe this is why the king is better suited here. So maybe the queen wants to swing round from f8 and then down. Although it could easily just go here to apply pressure even more. Or equally, your knight could do this route as well. And ultimately, I think black's going to be able to get all of their forces looking at this. You can get the knight, the bishop, 2 rooks and a queen all staring at it, which will mean that white will need to defend by bringing their knight back, probably having their rook and the queen defend laterally against it, which is a lot of pressure coming through it, and then your king is stuck there forever. However, black took the knight, which I think is just that they forgot that they've got a queen on h1 because the queen doesn't usually live on h1, so I think they thought they were getting a free piece. Instead they dropped an exchange, and what we see so often is once you make one blunder you make a second. So they play rook c8, a move too late, and now the queen can slide over to a3, and after the king moves pick up a bishop. So at this stage white's up a rook and it should be game over. If you're white, you've got an extra rook, you just want to be trading down pieces and kind of closing this game off. The only source of counterplay for black is probably to take here, bring your queen through and start causing some havoc on this side. So when white gets a spare moment, I think g5 is going to be practically a really good choice, because this queen's got no way of getting into the game then. The queen's only chance of getting into the game is by going here and along this diagonal, and you can shut it down by just moving your queen over there to oppose it and just saying you've got no chance of getting your queen into the game, I'm going to overrun you with an extra rook. So check. Knight goes to c6. Engine likes a6. I like the move that Claire played in the game of knight b4, but I think practically this is really good. The knight's pinned, you're guaranteed to exchange a reasonable amount of material and kind of preserve your rook advantage at the end of it. I think here black should probably be trading pawns to try and bring their queen through. So maybe from a practical perspective, even here playing g5 makes the most sense, just to really lock down their counterplay. Although the queen can slide out this way, you could slide yours back for a trade. I don't know. Yeah, I kind of like knight before. King f8, not a big fan of that. Like I say, if black can get their queen out, they're likely going to have to use this diagonal, and if you put your king there, if white can now play g5 at any point, how's this queen getting out? It's not getting out. White's upper rook and will be playing basically upper rook and a queen, because this it's got no prospects. So takes, pawn takes. Now I'd 100% be playing g5 here, lock this down. Very difficult to lose this then from the white perspective. Other reasonable move would just be to take the pawn here and exchange some pieces off, or most likely black will try and keep them on the board, and at that point you could push your pawn up. Queen over is the engine suggested move, but I don't really see why. Maybe just because it gives you better infiltration. I think practically taking the pawn and offering an exchange, or g5 is probably in a practical sense the best go for white here. So queen over, king up. So now it's basically saying infiltrate with your queen, which I like that. The queen stops the black queen from getting out. You'll be able to double up your rooks at the right point. You can exchange, trade off queens at your leisure as well. So I think that makes some sense. f4 does not make sense. I don't get what this is trying to do. Maybe you're trying to play on for f5, which I think is kind of valid, but you've just got to be careful of black's only source of counterplay in this game is there, or maybe trying to take control of the b file and bring the rooks in. So you've just got to be careful really about black getting the rooks in or the queen down this side of the board, but they've only really got 2 pieces to play with in your upper rook, so it should be relatively easy sailing if you're white here. but f4 I don't think did a lot. And they kind of set up the trap by taking on g4, and you can't take the pawn back for the reason you will see as Claire takes the pawn. So the eval swaps from +5 to -3, and the reason why is after queen h5 you don't have any means of defending your rook. The rook's pinned, so it can't move, and you can't defend it in any way. And when it takes, it's going to take the check. So how it's black that's suddenly pounced into a winning position. So if we do a pawn count, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So when they pick up the rook, they're going to be up a pawn. And probably also importantly, black's on the ascendancy, that when they pick up this rook, these two pawns are going to be pretty loose, and then there'll be chances of promoting this g pawn. Whereas white's sort of counterplay will be having to go up to b7, dislodge the rook, picking up the a pawn and trying to promote your a pawn. So it will be a bit of a foot race. So the best move, moving it over to the c file. You're now down a rook, and like I say, these pawns are soon going to get gobbled up. I think I'd probably come up here. Rook might go over. I take here, and then we'll see after rook takes here if you're getting mated or not. I'm not quite sure. Queen back is just a bit too passive, really, because you've given up the file for the rook. I think your chance of winning this is not to try and hold on to your existing material. It's to try and fight back, pick up that a7 pawn, and create some chances with your pushed a pawn. If you're passive, you're just going to get run off the board. You're down a pawn. You're going to be down a second in a moment as well, or black can take control of the files and kind of punish you that way. So they go for that kind of indirectly by playing c5. King moves out of the way to avoid the discovery, and then rook over check, now taking control of the b file. King moves. Engine likes takes. I kind of like the pushing option. It stops the activity of this rook, starts to create a bit of a mating net by giving you a hook that you can put a rook or maybe a queen on in the future, and white's starting to feel some pressure. Also now, if the rooks and queens get traded, you've got a protected passed pawn that's ultimately going to win you the game, unless white can get up to this a7 pawn. Rook h1 is not really what you want to be doing. I think trying to get some way of getting up to the a7 pawn makes sense, or trading off a set of rooks and trying to find some perpetual with your queen is probably the next best option if you're white. Playing defense on the pawns is not the way to go. Yeah, because after queen f3, attacking the rook and this square, you're in a bit of trouble now. For white, best move is to try and exchange off the rooks, and black will then be up an endgame even here. So if you go here, even if the trade, so if we saw that, like rook, I'll just put it on the board actually. So rook there, if we were to get a trade, queen could go down to h1 to pick up a pawn. It likes just pushing it and trying to promote it. I think I'd go here and pick up this pawn and get a bit more certainty with what I'm doing. Rook goes over to g1, a bit of a nothing move, like you're half threatening to play some like h5 ideas, but it's not what you want to be doing. I'm thinking if you're going to attack black, this is the place to attack it, or you sacrifice some pawns to try and get your queen in for a perpetual. But moving to g1 is kind of no good. Now it's the mate in 4, finds the right first move, queen b3, rook back. Now the idea was to play queen a4, well, let's put it on the board, queen a4, check, only move is queen there. You move your queen over to c3, queen will block. Now it's on the same row as the rook, and queen takes his mate. So that's the mate in 3. Instead to push the pawn, I mean it's not a mate in 3, but it is still totally winning. Best move is to go there and kind of offer the trade, but in any kind of traded games, this pawn's really advanced. The king's going to swoop round and pick up these pawns, whilst the white king and rook has to try and stop the c pawn. So almost anything you do here for black is going to be winning. And after queen c1, it's mate in 2, queen a4 check. You can't move to the b file, so you have to block with your queen. Queen takes, checkmate. So actually there's quite a lot to unpack in a Fischer random game. I wasn't quite sure how it was gonna go, but I'm giving you my insight into what I see in the position, and hopefully you find that useful. Thanks for watching.